data analysis, and social activism. Theoretical framework for us, right? We're using sites of resilience theory and structural violence theory. And really quickly, don't have a whole lot of time to get into this today, right? But I've been arguing for some time now, right, that street life is a site of resilience. Street identity is a site of resilience. That is blasphemous in the psychology literature, for those of us who are following the resiliency literature, right? For the most part, black men are argued not to be resilient. We are arguing that engaging in crime, right, it is a type of coping, as the keynote speakers addressed this morning, right? We're not necessarily arguing that it's right or wrong. In fact, we're turning this notion, this binary of right or wrong, on its head, right? And we're saying these are how people are making it. These are how folk are providing, right, in communities that have been historically and or contemporarily poor, economically poor. Right? Structural violence theory by Galtung argues that right, structural systems and or institutions have worked to organize, right, certain individuals, communities, and or neighborhoods, right, to be unable to meet their basic needs. Right, so what we're seeing in communities like Harlem or Wilmington, Delaware, where we actually come from in terms of where this project comes from, we're seeing profound notions and experience of structural inequality, large numbers of unemployment. Next, this is our question for today. How do street identified black men and women frame experiences with law enforcement? So we're going to actually talk to you a lot about our law enforcement data, given that it's very timely and relevant to what's going on. The project actually was grounded in a study on physical violence. And what we ultimately found was that structural inequality, and specifically economic well-being, was predictive of physical violence in the East Side and Southbridge neighborhoods of Wilmington, Delaware. However, we were going to focus on our policing data for today. Okay, so we hit the streets. We hit the streets primarily, right, in the summer of 2010. That was the year in which Wilmington broke its homicide record. Keep in mind, right, Wilmington is small. It's about 70,000 people. Right, that record that year was about 29 homicides. May not sound a lot, right, but keep in mind that per capita rate is high. You're looking, when you average that out in relation to 100,000 a base or population base, that works out to be about 38 homicides, right, per 100,000. That makes Wilmington have one of the highest homicide per capita rates in the country, higher than places like Philadelphia or Baltimore or New York City, right? The homicide per capita rate is also higher than places like Chicago or even Los Angeles. I haven't been to any one place. I actually come from this area, right, but I haven't been to any one community. And I've been in a lot of street communities, right, as a street ethnographer, and I haven't been to any one city where I've seen more folk physically assaulted and or killed, right? So meet them one day, the next day, they may not be here, right? So that the capita rate is actually real, and it's a better, accurate, or it's more of an accurate test on the prevalence of violence in a particular neighborhood. We were able to collect, with the PAR team, right, 520 surveys from the street corners of Wilmington, Delaware. So that means we went to where they sold heroin at, or crack cocaine at, right? The team was able to organize an 18-page survey, right? And we went out to these communities. We went out, and keep in mind, this is also a quota sample. So it allows us to some extent generalize some of the data back to the community. We were not able to do a random sample because it was unethical. We can talk a little bit more about that, though, however, maybe during the Q&A. Next. And I should say everyone received $5 in cash for the surveys. Surveys took approximately half an hour to complete. And they also received information on economic, educational, and counseling opportunities or services. This is our qualitative design as well. We collected a range of interviews in the forms of individual interviews, dual interviews, and group interviews. All participants received $10 in cash. Okay, so why are they going to the streets? Why would somebody sell crack cocaine? Why would somebody engage in illegal activity? It's a fair question. And our argument is simple. It's a site of resilience. People have been streamlined into economic poverty. We should also know, and let me just throw out there really quickly, unemployment is required in our economic system. Poor people are necessary so we can enjoy our privilege. And scholars need to talk about that more. So these communities are immersed in economic poverty, so that middle America can benefit, so that you and I, right, can live a better life. So, Leandre, 35, argues, financing, wanting better things for yourself. We act like we don't see it, but boarded houses paint our neighborhoods. Potholes paint our neighborhoods. That's the stuff that keeps us stuck. You know, little stuff like a pothole. That's telling me that how they don't care about me, that they don't want to even fix my pothole, and then I got to go home and 4 houses on my road is boarded. That's like an eyesore to me. Now I'm looking for a release valve, any release valve. And guess what that release valve is? There's a liquor store on every corner in the hood. The drinks is called wine and spirits. I need to be put in a better spirit. So I'll go get a shot and deal with looking at these boarded up houses and these potholes, and there's a boot on every car, and this is what I'm seeing. So when you got a child that's growing up and he's looking at this and he says, damn, Mom, because Dad ain't around, because he's down P.O. Box 9561 or 1181 Paddock Road doing who knows how much time, right? So he says, Mom, is this all that we have? You know, damn. He's a popular urban fiction scholar and author, and those addresses, interestingly enough, are the addresses to 2 of the biggest prisons in Wilmington. These are just pictures of us collecting surveys in the east side. More pictures. Let's just look at some of the unemployment data, right? So keep in mind, nearly 70%, nearly 70% of the men in the neighborhoods that we collected data from were unemployed. Right, so we have that 5.8 unemployment rate, and or when we even had a 6 or 7% unemployment. That's laughable to these communities. Right? Keep in mind, most low-income black and brown communities, black men are suffering approximately somewhere between a 50 to 70% unemployment rate. The women don't actually lag too much behind, right? And in our study, we found that 62% of the women were also unemployed. Next, right? Interestingly enough, when we looked at education, right? Interestingly enough, Wilmington, 65% of black boys in that city are dropping out of high school, right? In one of the neighborhoods that we were in, Southbridge, 100% of the black boys are dropping out of high school. It's because of the People's Report that media attention was brought to this issue. This was happening years on end. No one losing any sleep. There's also approximately a 50 to 70% unemployment rate in low-income black and brown communities as well. In our study, we found that 60%, right, either did not know or reported that their fathers did not have a high school diploma. 60% of our sample. And dropout and all of that is very predictive of a lot of crime and other issues. Let's look at some of the policing data. Right, so we see that from our data that about 80% of our sample seen someone else picked up, arrested, or taken away by police. Exposure. Exposure. Right? Next. Okay. Cool. Okay. I don't know what there we go. Number of times picked up and arrested. Right? About 58% of the sample says this has happened to them at some point. Next. Right? So this is we have lots of nice, I think, stop and frisk data. Interestingly enough, we found about between 58 and 60% of our sample actually were stopped at some point during a 12-month period. It happened for participants on average about 4 times per year, and as we can see, which is not a surprise, more men are being stopped in comparison to women. This is a street-identified sample, though, men and women. Next. Right, so we see about 30% of our sample is also frisked within a 12-month period, and as we see, which is no surprise, men are frisked more often than women. Again, the men and the women, for the most part in this sample, both are street identified. Next. Right, this is our exposure to police scale. Keep in mind, right, higher scores mean more exposure, been stopped, been frisked, etc. And as we can see, right, for the most part, most of the variance is actually caught up with the stop and frisk items, right, but for the most part, right, the younger folk, are being exposed more often to the police. Even though the differences, they're significant, but they're small. When we look at police being respected, in terms of what they think in terms of police respecting me, right? So we see something in the ballpark of about 70 or so percent, you know what I mean? That strongly disagree with the item that police respect me. Next. When we look at the police The item police give people a hard time for no reason. We see that about 80% of the people in our sample feel that they agree or strongly agree with this item. Next. Right? When we look at the item of worry that police I see on the streets might bother me and my friends, we see that about 61 or 2% or something like that agree or strongly agree with this item. Next. Right? And interestingly enough, while younger people were more exposed, interestingly enough, as the folk are getting older, actually their attitudes towards police are becoming more negative. So younger folk are being exposed, older folk actually have more negative attitudes. The difference is significant, but it is small. Next. And then we can see that men have more negative attitudes towards the police, higher scores of more negative attitudes, right? But keep in mind, although this is significant, the difference is actually small, interestingly enough. Next. And the last point I want to make before I turn it over, when we looked at a length of last incarceration, our end does drop, but for the most part, people aren't spending a whole lot of time in prison, right? So we can see that about 40% spent less than 3 months, right? And or about 60% spent less than 6 months, right? And only maybe about around 5-6%, right, have done greater than, have spent some time between 3 to 12 years in prison. This is consistent with the criminal justice literature with regard to incarceration rates. Most folk aren't going away for a long period of time. Do we have time?
We have 15.
Okay, you start. I don't know if we have time to go. Next.
Oh, so my,
Yeah.
the next one. Okay, so this is a regression table for attitudes towards police on measures of gender, age, and experiences with police. So really quick, experience with police is highly significant at the 0.01 level, meaning that black men and women with more police encounters express more negative attitudes than those with less police encounters. And most importantly, the age-male interaction variable is significant at the 0.05 level. So this significant interaction indicates that the effect of gender on attitudes towards police is different at various levels of age. Next one. And to look at this interaction more closely, this figure looks at the effect of predicted attitudes towards police across age for black men and women in the sample. So negative attitudes towards police increase significantly with age for both men and women. However, the difference in the slope, as you can see here, with the age, attitudes, relationships is greater for men than it is for women. Interestingly, findings also revealed that young black women ages 18 to 19 express more negative attitudes than black men of that same age. But after that age range, the gap between negative attitudes increases with, as you see, black men expressing significantly more negative attitudes than the women. And finally, the difference in attitudes towards police is greater for those who are older. So thus, the difference in attitudes between 18-year-old black men and women in the sample is much smaller than the difference between attitudes between 35-year-olds in the sample. And this all demonstrates the kind of the age, gender interaction variable between men and women in the sample.
Real quick, Dr. Payne talked about the timeliness of our data and how important it is. And as we know that there is a lot of national headlines about the interaction between the police and people in black and brown communities. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to tease out of our data how this relationship played out in the city of Wilmington. So it's right here some of our background stuff. You heard Brooklyn talk about the age and gender and education relationship. And all these right here are variables that in our previous context has shown to impact relationship between the police and black and brown community. So we also looked at some research done by some British criminologists. And they looked at what we say is concerns. So as we know, in every relationship is built on trust. But when that trust is broken, what you have to do is you have to find out what concerns you need to address in order to improve on that relationship. So what we did was instrumental concerns, these right here are some perceived crime problems, some actual victimization stuff. Then you have expressive models, which is the actual community physical condition and the quality of life issues. As you heard Leandre talk about that we got potholes in the middle of the street. So this right here is a real concern for people in the city of Wilmington. Next slide. So building on trust, building on Stoutland model study that she conducted in Boston in 2001, and she differentiated between the different types of trust. And procedural-based trust is trust that deal with priority and being respected. As you've seen in one of the slides that Dr. Payne showed, he said something about do the police respect me. The other thing, the outcome-based trust, deals with things like are the police competent and are they dependable? So we wanted to see whether or not what type of concern needs to be addressed and whether they impact different types of trust. So there's our regression model, OLS model, and as you see, for the procedural trust. So what came out of this right here, what we found was that women had expressed more confidence in the police than males, something that Brooklyn had talked about earlier. But we also see when it came down to the instrumental model, if you wanted to impact procedural-based trust, then you need to address victimization, perceived crime problems. So if you were an institution or a police force or a city government, if you want to impact that procedural-based trust, that priority and that respect, then you need to look at programs that impact it or going to look at perceived crime problem after victimization. Now for the outcome-based trust, you see that if you want to impact that right there, you need to look at quality of life issues. And later on, I'll tell you about some of the stuff that we're actually doing in the city to address some of these models. Because this is part of my thesis right here. It has been very instrumental in developing a lot of programs and policy that's being implemented now in the city of Wilmington, Delaware.
Right, so this is important, right? Keep this in mind, right? So all of this data, right, organized, analyzed by the community, and organized and analyzed by folk, right? A number of folk who've had experiences in the streets and criminal justice system. My point, this underscores what is possible, what we can do, and what we're actually ultimately calling for is that we return to these communities and train them well. Right? I'm talking about the guy that's on the corner doing X, Y, and Z. Right? So these are some of the responses. These are some of the outcomes for our PAR-based members. Jonathan Wilson completed his Master's of Arts and now is working on his doctorate and/or his EDD. He opened up a barbershop, created a GED and youth mentoring program. He also has something called the Fathership Foundation program, which just begun, and he organized 2 youth violence and education forums. Right? One of the most violent guys on the project. Now working on his doctorate. Right? Ashley Randolph, she got a job from United Way in Delaware, one of our partners. Now she's an intern at Barclays Bank. She will be an engineer in the next year and a half, right? So she's working away. Pat Gibbs, right, wrote 2 books after the initial funding ended the project, and he now actually supervises this Wilmington Cease Violent Street Outreach Model. We proposed 17 recommendations to the city and state, right? One of which was we need a street outreach program, right? And they brought in, and now he runs this program. That's the mayor right there in an article, lending his support. Right? This is Darrell Chambers, completed his Master's of Arts, now enrolled as a doctoral student at the Criminology Department in the University of Delaware. He also was hired on 4 other UD professors' research projects. Keep in mind, all members receive some form of quality opportunity. By that we mean $15 to $20 hour jobs. And 6 of our members enrolled in college, 2 of which were enrolled in graduate school, both completed their masters, and those 2 are now pursuing their doctorates. Right? So we can do great things if we organize ourselves to do so.
Real quick. As Yasser said earlier, as far as action research, there's also an activism part to it. So that would be a call for the community to come. And what we did was we were called by the Deputy Chief of Staff to have a town hall meeting where we were going to bring some of the politicians. That's the governor right there, the one with the shiny head. And we brought them down, and that's the mayor with the Scully on. We brought them down in the community so that they can hear and address some of the concerns of the people. So they're part of our action program.
This is the first week in January, and in part it was done in relation to all the policing issues with black males across the country. The governor, as he says, reached out to us, and the mayor, and they wanted us to take us to the hot spots and hot sites in Wilmington. So we took them to those hot spots in the community and the standing room only.
Yeah, and that right there, at that time right there, out of 11 shootings, we had 6 homicides. There's more pictures. Same thing. We went to what we call social informational hubs. We went to barbershops. We had where there's a lot of black ownership. Yeah.
This is you, brother.
Okay, so from some of the work that I have done and the value of my research, I was elected by the governor to be on what Delaware Crime Prevention Commission. And we're actually going to try to develop some strategies. It's not going to be just a lock them up thing. I told them that I need alternative strategies other than just locking black and brown people up, because there are some structural issues that we need to address. Because we say that the structural stuff is what leads to structural inequality, leads to the physical violence.
Keep in mind, right, because he's modest. Only 9 people was actually identified and picked to this illustrious commission, right? This is a big deal in Delaware. This is humongous front page news, right? And Darrell Chambers is the only scholar, doctoral student, but scholar from the University of Delaware that was selected to be on a crime commission. Mind you, we do a lot of crime studies there. He's been highlighting a number of articles, as he should. Right?
That is a part of our commission.
Ultimately, we're calling for communities to be situated within a context of personal and communal empowerment. However, it's important to underscore that a context for empowerment must be provided. Opportunity must be provided, right? So that they can thrive. But if we ignore opportunity and/or forms of empowerment, then we will see what we've seen a lot in terms of the criminal behavior that we all want to see go away. That's including the crack cocaine dealer as well. They want to work. Keep that in mind. The literature supports this. They want to be employed. They want to go to school. And I'm talking about the guys in the crack cocaine location, including college, right? And they also want to give back to their local neighborhoods. Our report can actually be found at a website called thepeoplesreport.com. You can also follow us, right? People's Report on Facebook page, in addition to our Twitter account and Google+. We're very active. We have a lot of followers. That's my social media manager, or our social media manager over there, right? The governor follows us, the mayor follows us, and a whole bunch of other folk follow us, right? Because we're really, really trying to get this word out as in relation to street harm. Thank you. Sorry.
Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? So I'm Pete White with the Los Angeles Community Action Network, and I think from the outset, I would say our presentation is going to attempt to do a couple of things. Through the use of stories and data and research, we're going to attempt to immerse you into the environment of downtown Los Angeles, Skid Row, right? We're going to attempt to lift language that you know, like stop and frisk, and show you how stop and frisk, while in LA we call it catch and release, impacts a very small community in Skid Row, in the same way that it's impacting many boroughs. But before we get started in our presentation, we like to sort of pay homage or lift up those whose shoulders we stand on, right? And so the work that we're going to talk about today is largely a result of meeting Dr. Payne, and meeting the folks from Wilmington, Delaware, right? Standing on the shoulders of the community who felt the importance of developing an organizing model or a research model that expressed their liberation, right? And we'll talk about that research design in a second. I want to acknowledge some of the folks in the room here that are now on the East Coast, but do a lot of work on the West Coast as well. Dr. Jordan Camp, Dr. Christina Heatherton right here, and soon to be Dr. Dejane Dozier right here. We're hopeful that in our presentation, we're going to bring the experiences of folks on the ground in Skid Row, right? And what they confront on a daily basis. And their ideas, our ideas about what resilience and liberation will look like. My co-presenter this morning is General Dogon. He's going to introduce himself, and we're going to get it going.
First and foremost, thank you for having me. My name is General Dogon. I'm born and raised downtown LA in an area called Skid Row. presently a civil rights organizer with LA County. And
First line.
so when you first look at this picture, you say, damn, downtown got it going on, downtown LA, right? You see the sky-rise buildings, you got the street cars, you got the loft living, and you got the fine restaurants, with the martinis and the margaritas and all that stuff in there, right? But when you look up closer at this picture, you know, I don't see me in this picture. Not only did I don't see me in this picture, I don't see the other 13 to 14 black house and homeless residents that are from downtown LA. And the reason why you don't see us is because we've been selectively targeted and moved out of this picture. Now that we've been moved out of this picture, they've been trying to move us out of downtown all in all.
And so when Dovan talks about, we're talking about an area, historically, Skid Row, home to 13 to 15,000 marginally housed and homeless individuals in the community, largely black. There's been a large black population in Los Angeles historically. When you go back to 1870, it was a mixture of natives from Mexico and former slaves who founded the city of Los Angeles. And so it's interesting when we talk about histories, where histories start, actually is oftentimes left out. People forget that we actually founded this city. I think the other thing that's important to note when we talk about Los Angeles, in the 1950s there was a large migration of African Americans from the South, largely northern Louisiana, that settled in Los Angeles, sort of running away from Jim Crow type politics and looking for opportunities. And so when we look at these types of pictures and don't see ourselves, we know something is wrong.
And you know what's crazy too? I've just noticed that this is my block that I live on right now. They still don't see me up there.
And you know, from their vantage point, downtown is looking up. But when you look at the picture, looking up for who? And when you look up, your nose is pointing up and away from those on the street, right? And we argue that the role of policing in downtown Los Angeles is what's elevating the ability for some to look up and look away. And so why street park? I mean, we're clear. About, I think it's like 2 years ago, Yasser, maybe 3 years ago now, that we discussed this model of participatory action research. For us, we're a community-based organization, anti-poverty organization that's interested in the liberation of communities in Los Angeles, in Wilmington, Delaware, and across the globe, right? And so the idea of participatory action research, street participatory action research, resonated, right, with our social change strategies. You know, strategically, we said this makes sense. We said nothing about me without me. Downtown Los Angeles is one of the heavy researched areas in the country. But when the researchers come in, they have they have their ideas. We all walk in the door with our bias about what they want to find. We would argue that the data that they retrieve, that they take, that they steal, that they exploit, does not paint an accurate picture of what's going on in our communities. And so about 6 or 7 years ago, we actually stopped researchers from coming to our community. We said, if you want to come to our community to do research, first we want to know the question, we want to help develop the question, and then we want to own the data. Some thought that they could sort of live with that. But when we really got into research methods and when we really got into our needs, most of those researchers backed out. And then we found researchers and others and institutions who sort of vibed with us. And we said, we will work with you. Nothing about me or us without me. And in street park also, there's lessons of liberation. Right? We think about the Literacy Project in Cuba and other things where we know that when we organize our knowledge, when we organize our communities, our streets, it can lead to our liberation. And so that resonated, that gained resonance with our organizing model and our social change agenda. And then lastly, this is where the Community Action Network, the social action agenda or compact, that this has to be a part of this methodology, was the thing that made me stand up and made our community stand up and say, yes, right here you'll see one of our respondents in our survey says, "I'm glad it's being done. So glad black men are being asked what we think," right? Because largely folks aren't asked what they think, right? Largely day by day folks aren't asked what they think, real quickly. And so what have we accomplished by integrating street par with our organizing model? I'll go through this. I know this is a heavy slide. I hate heavy slides, so I'll go through it quickly. And so what we have accomplished is really community visioning and action planning. We've been doing work for 15, 16 years, and we felt that we were doing very strategic work. You know, we've had many victories, lots of defeats as well. But we saw when we began to integrate this method of research into our actual work that it informed our strategic planning in new ways. We had tools by which to measure our impact in ways that we had not before sort of getting into this. Building leadership. You know, part of community work is, you know, the development of political analysis and practical skills to enable everybody in the community to have agency that leads to our vision of what it should be, right? But PAR also helped us develop a culture of research, investigation, and interrogation of a question into the organization. Not separate from, but integral to the organizing model. It's also allowed us to change the political narrative. I mean, you know, the lamestream, we don't call it the mainstream media, we call it the lamestream media, usually has a lot to say about our community that does not represent us or reflect who we are. We see utilizing PAR as a way to use that data to create new language and narratives around our identity. We've been quite successful. We had another project that we're not going to talk about today called the Dirty Divide, which examines public health infrastructure in downtown Los Angeles, right? When we talk about downtown, when you saw the pictures, there's like a dividing line, an apartheid line where on one side of Main Street, literally it is Main Street, there's bathrooms, there's trash collection, there's public park benches. But then to the east of that, there are none of these things. And we call that the Dirty Divide. It took a couple of years, but now finally changing the narrative and the language, the media picked it up, the press picked it up, and there's a newfound responsibility to understand that there's public health infrastructure needs east of Main Street. And then lastly, like I said earlier, what's been accomplished, just that we're owners of knowledge, that having what we consider hood-based data that the community understands is being used to create a plan for liberation equals power, right? That equals power. I'm going to say that again. Having data that the community participates in gathering, participates in its analysis, and then participates in sort of the action agenda being played and paved and moved out, creates and equals power. And then the research design methods, I'm getting to you right now, though, but I'm getting tired. So Kroliczynski, we used a scale. It was interesting. We were listening to his talk, and he allowed us to use a well-being scale that he was piloting a couple of years ago. And we use that as part of our research design. And in it, we're sort of investigating interpersonal, community, occupational, psychological, physical, and economic well-being, right, on the streets of Skid Row. We, of course, as I said earlier, we used the work of the Wilmington Street PAR study because we saw so many similarities between the community of Wilmington and the community of downtown Los Angeles. And if we broaden that out, the community of Wilmington is probably like very similar to many black communities. And so we said, we need to do what our enemies, and I call them our enemies, do. We need to export our best practices and our models. And for us in this participatory action research, their design is a best practice, particularly when we're talking about using PAR for community change organizations. We had, of course, qualitative section with various open-ended questions. We feel that it is important for people to give their voice, power, and opinion in research and in policy and community-based change. And then we did a demographic section, which was developed by the LA Can PAR team, which is largely led and assisted by Dejanay Dozier right here in New York. We're going to have to sneak our way from this cold weather soon. All right, and so So we're just going to get into our police data right now. We're going to show you someone we think you might know. And we're calling this part Bratton, Brutality, and Bullshit.
So, yeah, so in 2006, the city of Los Angeles, the mayor, including William Bratton, like enacted what they called a Safer Cities initiative. It was based on the broken windows policing policy. And what it did was it brought 110 extra police to Skid Row, making Skid Row the most police community, not only in America, but in the world, right? And they was on just these 110 cops, they would spend $6.5 million. That didn't include overtime, extra batons, and none of that stuff. This was just their salary right there. Right? At the same time, the city of Los Angeles is 465 miles, right? And for the whole entire city, with Skid Row being the most concentrated part where all the homeless folks is at, the city's budget for homelessness services the whole year was $5.7 million. So when you do the math, they were spending more money on 110 cops just on Skid Row, just the police and gentrify black folks out of the community than they were on the whole damn city trying to end homelessness, right? And the first 3 years of the initiative, we're in the 9th year right now because of the work that's been coming out of LA County, some of the victories and the feats that Pete talked about. This is the reason why we're in the 9th year. But the first 3 years right now, the initiative, they was averaging 36,000 tickets. They was averaging 1,300 tickets a month. Right? Now, getting a ticket on Skid Row is like getting a ticket nowhere else in the road. You stop, you're thrown against the wall, roughly, you're handcuffed, you search, they run your name for warrants and warrant check like you a member of Qaeda and you wanted all the way around the world, right? Then on top of that, they had 27,000 arrests. 27,000 arrests. They was averaging 700 arrests per month, right? So all this was going down in an area that's only 15 blocks.
Wow.
15 block area and with people that was only like 13 to 15,000 people. So how do you get these numbers when you only got 13,000 people? You tell me. Next slide.
And so the impacts of arrest, right? If this thing goes up, it's not going up. Oh, I'm hitting it. I'm tapping on it. There we go. And so, as Dogon talked about, the impacts of an arrest is not like you just go in jail and you're getting out and you're bailing out. 51% of people surveyed. We did an assessment, a human rights assessment in 2010 with Dr. Forrest Stewart, looking at the impacts of arrests on poor people in poor communities. 51% of a sample, and we only surveyed 180 people, 51% of those surveyed responded losing housing as a result of the arrest. Another 42% reported losing social services, right? And so losing those self-sustaining things they needed. And 16.4% reported losing housing. Over 59% reported physical and verbal abuse by officers. And so this idea that you just can arrest your way out of poverty, actually it shows you your situations are exacerbated by arrest. In that same study that we did, in the average, in 2010, in that sample size, all right, so the average number of stops and detainments of that 180 number was 5.3 per person. The average stop was 5.3 per person. And during these stops, the majority were handcuffed, searched, background checked, and asked if on parole or probation. Right? Think about those numbers. And then, for us, it's important. So we're talking about the numbers, but we want to show you also what it looks like if this works. I don't know if it's going to work. No, it's a video. Here it is. Here it is. So this is downtown Los Angeles. It was downtown Los Angeles. Slide, because we know that Bill Bratton has went before the New York legislature to enhance the penalty for resisting arrest. He wants to make resisting arrest a felony charge, and he highlights protest as one of the reasons, and protesters, peaceful protesters, as one of the reasons that he wants to make a felony out of resisting arrest. This was James Foster, duly diagnosed man suffering with mental illness. And that was resisting arrest based on what Bill Bratton was saying. And this is the type of behavior that he wants to criminalize to have ultimate control. And so I added that slide because it's important for y'all here in New York, when that goes before the legislature, or when you hear about it, to create an uproar and to make sure that that does not go past. We have a few more slides that sort of show. Dogon, these are yours.
So when you see this picture right here, it's something like the picture that we just saw with all the cops responding to one scene. And this is what happened, because anytime you have the largest concentration of cops in one area, you got packs of cops, 15 on this corner, 15 on that corner, 15 on this corner. When they get a call, they all come running to that one central spot. And so you end up with one cop, each cop got a different body part, put it that way. And it results in the use of force. And this is another scene right here. This is a homeless man that was shot on 6th and Stanford for just recycling. And this is another incident we've been having. Is the cops are being shooting unarmed black men. And the majority of these guys have mental disabilities. And the last guy that was shot, that was unarmed, was shot by a SWAT team. SWAT was called in to shoot a homeless man off the roof. And their idea of shooting was to save him. You know, that's their philosophy, but we're going to shoot him to save him. They ended up shooting him with a bean gun back. They shot him in the head and he ended up dying. But this is the use of force that how it's played out in the pictures.
And so, you know, people, the mainstream narrative or the lamestream narrative says, you know, race doesn't matter. We say that's bullshit. We say that race matters. And when we talk about policing in this country, we're very clear that the legacy of policing is rooted in the police department being slave catchers, right? They were slave catchers first. And then they were the enforcers of things like the Black Code and Jim Crow. And then during the Civil Rights period, they were the enforcers of segregation and subjugation. Bratton was on Travis Smiley, and he said that himself. And for us, what we see is not new. We see a continuation of our legacy of history. And these last pictures will show you. Horses are used in downtown Los Angeles. Patrols. To me, that could be 1850. Look at that hat. Look at that hat. Look at that scowl. We could be in 1850 Alabama and not 2015 Skid Row, right? And just the use. The last thing I'll say about these pictures, this is all about, you know, policing is about the economic segregation of people. Right? And so, for us, when we look at these pictures, we're also reminded that it's in a community that's rapidly gentrifying, where dividing lines are being created. And what we didn't show you on these pictures, there were so many arrests. When Dogon talked about the 13,000 to 15,000 people, that there were coffles. I don't know if people know what coffles are. It's when slaves were walked to slave ships. There were lines of people being walked through our community, as if, buy these horses, buy these horses. And that's where we're going, right? We're going to RoboCops. So we're just going to do this last little piece real quickly because we're rolling. So we're going to give you a quick snapshot around the attitudes and experiences with LAPD in 2015. So the first three, we showed you SEI. Those numbers came from a 2006 study we participated in. The arrests numbers came from a 2010 study we participated in. This is our latest PAR study. It's going to be interesting for you to see that the numbers here are going to be very similar to what was found in Wilmington, Delaware, right? And so, since living on Skid Row, have you been arrested? This is preliminary data. This is the responses from 180 folks. Nearly 47% of those surveyed had been arrested since living in Skid Row, right? Nearly 47%. Have you been ticketed? Again, the numbers are staggering when you think about the actual rate. So nearly 60% of those surveyed had been ticketed since living in Skid Row. Police do their jobs well, right? All right, and so this is straight taken, or agreed to be taken, out of the Wilmington stuff, right? And so when you look, when asked the question, police do their job well, 34% strongly disagree that police do their well when asked that statement, and another 28% disagree. Combine that 62% of respondents in like a 50 square block area that disagree with the statement that police do their job well. Police respect me, right? And so here again, 37% of those who were asked this question disagree with the statement that police respect them. Another 28 disagree. Combine that 65% of total respondents, right, who have some level of disagreement. Like, this slide to me is really, really poignant because if you come to Los Angeles and you read the LA Times and they talk about community policing, the narrative is communities, particularly black and brown communities, they like, it's been transformed and the police departments are better now. Not when you actually go to the streets and ask the streets what they believe.